So welcome to the first Monday night Against the Stream class that I'm doing just online without the community present. A little awkward for me, I have to admit, to just be sitting alone and giving some teachings to cameras. And I'm happy to do it and to share it, and thank you for joining me. The topic is forgiveness in the series of teachings on Against the Stream. We're at the place in the book of having gone through loving kindness and compassion and appreciation and equanimity, where we are now at this chapter on forgiveness. So just as we begin, before I lead a guided meditation, I want to share a few things and ask you to just reflect on your relationship to forgiveness. What place does it hold in your life, in your spiritual practice? Is this something that you've been working on for a long time? Are these meditation practice something that you regularly are doing, trying to embody, practice? Or is it something that's not really on the radar yet? I was a little bit hesitant, or had some question about, with everything happening in the world today, with the coronavirus, with all of the ways that our lives, and I feel like it's kind of everyone on the planet's lives, is changing, from this encouragement to socially distance, us to stay away from people, to self-quarantine, businesses closing, schools closing, communities that are usually very interactive, pulling back, all of us pulling back into ourselves, into our own homes, into our own lives, in a way that's not so engaged with the world. For some people, that's possible. For some people, it's not possible, depending on your career or work. I think there's still a lot of people that are having to show up, and there's a lot of us who are in a position who can no longer are able to show up into our community, our meditation groups, or to our jobs, or those of us who have children, our children are home from school. So I was questioning whether I should go along with the series, and when I realized that the topic was forgiveness, I feel like, and I hope it is true, I feel like forgiveness is an appropriate topic for what's happening right now. Maybe a little bit more compassion, maybe a little bit more loving kindness towards how our own difficult emotions and towards the people in the world. A lot of letting go on Friday night. Those of you who tuned in, my talk was about the importance of non-attachment, what the Dharma teaches us about letting go of our plans, of our ideas, and accepting things change, sometimes drastically, like they are right now. This chapter on forgiveness in the book starts with this quote from a man named Henry Nouwen. And he says, "Forgiveness is the name of love practiced among people who love poorly. The hard truth is that all of us love poorly. We need to forgive and be forgiven every day, every hour, unceasingly. That is the great work among the fellowship of the weak, that is the human family." So wherever you are tuning in, listening to this, I invite you for a moment before I go on to just reflect on forgiveness as an act, as a practice of love. And the humility that we can all have, that we have to forgive over and over. We have to forgive ourselves, we have to forgive each other. Unceasingly. And I like this. Way that he says the fellowship of the weak, that is the human family. I don't know, weak, I would maybe say, humans are very strong and powerful, or, weak as in sensitive, easily offended, easily injured, easily, that we're not always in a strong place, that sometimes we're quite afraid, quite easily hurt. And there's no judgment in that's actually part of what we're doing, part of the human condition. I started practicing forgiveness quite early on in my meditation practice and my recovery from addiction. Within the first couple of years of getting sober and starting to meditate, I was, reading my father's book, Gradual Awakening, and starting to read Jack Kornfield's material, and forgiveness was in the teachings. It was, okay, learn mindfulness, learn loving kindness, learn forgiveness, learn compassion. And all of it was foreign to me. And I found that mindfulness was useful, practical, applicable. It gave me some relief. And what I'm calling mindfulness actually was an early mindfulness called a mindfulness meditation, which was really just breath awareness, technically concentrating on my breath and ignoring my mind, just the first foundation. And I found so much relief in that, in learning to ignore my mind. But then when it came to doing the heart practices, loving kindness and compassion, and then especially forgiveness, our topic tonight, I often found that when I sat down to do forgiveness meditation, that rather than it being soothing or giving me relief, that often it actually made me feel more angry, more resentful, that it increased or at least uncovered a lot of the negative, afflictive feelings that were living in my heart and mind. But I had enough faith, enough confidence, enough hope that the Dharma would help me. And I knew I had some verified faith. Mindfulness works, getting some relief there. So I'll do whatever I'm encouraged to do. I'll apply the heart practices. I'll do the forgiveness instructions. I'll do these practices. And also because I was just so clear that my anger and hatred and self-hatred and the guilt and shame that I was feeling were just making my life worse. We're just creating more suffering, levels of suffering. And I wanted relief. And the Dharma says, this will give you relief. My teacher said, this will help free you from the suffering of anger and hatred and unworthiness and guilt and shame. And my experience in the early days of doing forgiveness, as I've already pointed to, was that I would sit here and I would say to myself, I forgive you. And then my mind would reject it. My heart was defended. And it didn't feel good to say I forgive you. There was too much resistance. And in a lot of ways, I believe that what was happening is that it felt too vulnerable to be that loving to myself. And I just had to keep doing it and kind of fake it and sort of push through all of, rather than saying like, oh, this doesn't feel good, I'm going to stop doing it. It was just that confidence of like, okay, it doesn't feel good, but I'm going to keep doing it. Because I actually want the freedom that might happen if I could, the idea of being free from the suffering that my anger, that my hatred, that my resentments, ill will, spite, judgment was creating in my life. It was very attractive. I like the idea of now that I'm sober, now that I'm trying to meditate, trying to be generous and of service, I'd like to be free from all of this hatred. And slowly, over the years of practice, and sorry, that's kind of the bad news. In my experience, it took years. It wasn't like I did it a few times and I forgave it myself and everyone else. It was years of doing it. Before I even started until I even could sincerely say, I forgive you to myself or to someone else or to ask for forgiveness and make amends. Before it even felt really sincere. In the beginning, it actually felt fake. Like I was just saying the words, but it wasn't sincere. But then after some months and years of doing it over and over, there was a way that it became more familiar and more sincere. And eventually started to feel the releasing of old held resentments, started to feel a change in the way that I felt about myself and more compassion and more friendliness and less judgment and less, judgment about myself. My mind, I feel like kind of automatically when it came to, so let me pause for a moment, forgiveness, the way that I was taught it, the way that I practice it, is in three categories. Asking for forgiveness to the people that we have caused harm to. All of the people, thinking of all of the people in our life. And it's a good place to start. Who have I hurt? When are the moments where I've been unskillful, angry, afraid, confused in some way or another, and my pain, my confusion, my lack of love, my lack of skill has spilled out onto other people. And we make that list, and even just now, just thinking about all of the times that we've hurt others, that we've caused harm, intentionally or unintentionally. Sometimes we didn't mean to, but we still did. And then the second category is all of the people that have hurt us. And of course, it's important, I think it's important to start with the humility of, I've been confused and caused harm at times. And hopefully I'm forgivable. And then when we shift to that second category of all of the people that harmed me, who were confused, who were suffering, maybe they're forgivable. And then the third category, which is self-forgiveness, forgiving ourselves. What I was saying was that especially when it came to forgiving others, I felt like my mind almost automatically made 3 categories. The people, and you can do it right now, just thinking about all of the resentments that you have, all of the people that you judge, all of the people that you hate, whether those are personal relationships where you've been harmed, systems of oppression in this world, individuals that you despise, that you judge, politicians, whoever it is. And my mind started to create categories. I'm not saying that you should do this, but it's just what happened for me, which was there was the list of the people that I resent, but that I want to forgive. I'm willing to forgive. And that feel like I can. I'll start sending forgiveness to this whole sort of long list of people that, friends and family who I love and I hate. And then the list of maybe. Not there yet. But they're too fresh, too painful, but maybe I could get eventually to the place of forgiving these people, this second category. And part of this for me is that the teaching as it was presented to me and as I practice it is start with the easier ones. Start forgiving the people in your life that you that are mixed. You care about them and they're difficult to tolerate sometimes and they're unskillful at times. And work your way up to the most difficult. Don't start offering forgiveness to the most difficult person in your life or the most difficult people in the world. Start with the first category, which is people that you want to forgive, that you love, and that are currently not really in your heart in this moment. And then this list of maybe. Work your way up. And that was my experience, is that I was able to work up to the people that I thought, not yet. And then came to the place of doing the practice regularly. But then there was this third category where when I started forgiveness practice, there was a good number of people that I said, no way, I'll never. Those people are unforgivable. I'll never forgive them. And even in my experience, even those people eventually became maybes. And the maybes became, yes, I'm willing, and I'll bring them in the meditation, and I'll sincerely offer forgiveness. I'll train my heart and mind to forgive. And I just want to pause for a moment and, at this time in your life, whatever's going on, I think most of us would acknowledge it's a pretty scary time. And maybe getting some resentments towards, how the government's handling it, or people who are hoarding toilet paper, or, your neighborhood, your job that just laid you off, whatever it is. Acknowledging, I'm a little pissed about this. I'm afraid. I'm anxious. I'm scared and maybe angry, maybe resentful. Sometimes it's just like kind of mad at the world. Just like, this is so inconvenient. I had all of these plans and I know there's no individual to blame, but I'm just mad that this is happening. So forgiveness does feel like quite a appropriate practice for us at this time. I hope it feels that way to you. Let me share a few more thoughts on forgiveness, and then we'll do the meditation. One is, and this is, I think, the key, that in order to forgive, it's usually necessary, it's often necessary, or at least sometimes necessary, to separate the person that we're trying to forgive from what they did. And this is called separating the actor from the action. Because I want to say that I think some actions are unforgivable. There's some, things that people do on this planet, the way that we treat each other, the violence, the abuse, those actions are unforgivable. But the people that behave in that way, out of their own confusion, their own ignorance, their own fear, their own greed and hatred and delusion, the human beings, when we hurt each other, the human being is redeemable, is forgivable, even though what we may have done may be unforgivable. So in order to get to this place of forgiveness, we have to separate the actor from the action. I hope that makes sense. Now, let me just pause for a moment because, and I probably should have said this up front, my belief is forgiveness is for yourself. You don't forgive others for them. You forgive those who have harmed you for yourself so that you don't have to continue walking around angry, suffering at the people who caused us suffering, who harmed us. So the whole practice of forgiveness is for our own happiness, for our own well-being, our own liberation. I hope that is your understanding too. That people don't have to earn our forgiveness. People don't have to be worthy of our forgiveness. We don't forgive for them. We forgive so that we can be free from the suffering of resentment, of hatred, of ill will. So separating the actor from the action, we're doing this for ourselves, for our own recovery, our own freedom, our own happiness. And that forgiveness doesn't mean necessarily reconciling. Sometimes I believe we hold on to our anger, our hatred, because we think we need it in order to hold a good boundary. Rather than what I'm encouraging, which is forgive completely. It's not worth holding on to any form of resentment or hatred. You'll only be hurting yourself if you hold on to that. And have a good boundary. You don't have to reconcile relationships that are unhealthy. My father, who taught me much of these perspectives, used to say, forgiveness is allowing someone that you've put out of your heart, that the anger, the hatred, the resentment has put out of our heart. Forgiveness is allowing that person back into our heart. And this quote that I started with, forgiveness is the name of love. And when we stop loving, then we need to do the forgiveness practice. And we let them back into our heart, but not necessarily back into our home. And that's the boundary, where you say, I forgive you internally, I'm not holding on to this anymore, and I'm still not interested in a further contact, further relationship. And then each of us has to use our own discernment when it comes to forgiveness and making amends and offering forgiveness. what is the appropriate kind of relationship going forward? It doesn't mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means strong boundaries still. Lastly, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about this after the meditation, but one of the things that is important for us always to remember when we're talking about reality, the Dharma, nature as it is to remember that everything is impermanent. Everything that happens, arises, and passes, including forgiveness. Sometimes I think the way that our language is, where we can say something like, I forgive you, and it sounds so permanent. We don't tend to say, I forgive you in this moment. We don't tend to say, I forgive you now, but we'll see what happens in 5 minutes. I might be angry at you again. Forgiveness is an ongoing practice, and it's a practice of letting go of hatred, letting go of resentment, letting go of ill will. Forgiveness is not permanent, and it's not something that we can just make happen. It's a process that we develop. It's a skill that we develop. And sometimes it takes years of sending forgiveness to somebody before we truly feel it, before we get relief. And that's really my sense. Forgiveness is an ongoing practice. This isn't something like you have the forgiveness phase of your Dharma practice. Forgiveness is ongoing. In my experience, for over 30 years, I've been doing forgiveness practice, and I continue to do it because I continue to be offended by people. I continue to be resentful. My mind continues to feel harmed, injured by others, and I continue to meet them with forgiveness, and it's an ongoing practice. In Refuge Recovery, we say, start forgiveness practice from the beginning. If you're coming into recovery from addiction, learn mindfulness and learn forgiveness. These are the first two skills you're going to need to stay sober, to recover. And alternate every other day, mindfulness, forgiveness, And then in the program we say, and keep doing this until you have no more resentments. And there's a thing where it says, in 5 years of your recovery, continue forgiveness until you have no more resentments. At 10 years sober, at 15 years sober, continue your forgiveness practice until you can bring anybody to mind without meeting them with hatred. You can bring your worst enemy to mind and have compassion for their confusion and ignorance rather than hatred of them. And this is what the Buddha teaches us, and this is the goal, and something that I am, just like everyone else, in process of. Not something I do perfectly, but something that I feel very committed to, of trying to get to live my life in a way free from hatred. So let's meditate. We'll go through the 3 categories: forgiveness, asking forgiveness, offering forgiveness, and forgiving ourselves. And then perhaps I'll have some more things to say after the sitting practice. We'll meditate for 30 minutes.